What if I told you that a simple change you make before a meal could quietly shift how your body handles sugar for hours afterward? Not a drug, not a supplement craze, something that has been sitting in kitchens for centuries, overlooked, underestimated, yet deeply connected to your metabolism. Today, we are going to talk about apple cider vinegar and why it changes what your body does with sugar. As a physician and scientist, I've spent decades studying how the body protects itself. Your metabolism is not broken. Your body is not working against you. In fact, it is constantly trying to maintain balance, even in a world overloaded with sugar. The problem is not sugar alone, how fast sugar floods your bloodstream, and how your cells respond to it. This is where apple cider vinegar enters the conversation, not as a miracle, but as a metabolic signal. Apple cider vinegar changes how the body processes sugar at a fundamental level. And this distinction is critical because it shifts the focus from simply lowering blood sugar numbers to improving metabolic intelligence. When carbohydrates are consumed, the digestive system rapidly breaks them down into glucose, which enters the bloodstream and triggers insulin release. In modern diets, this process often happens too quickly, overwhelming the body's regulatory systems. Apple cider vinegar introduces a subtle but powerful interruption to this pattern by slowing the activity of digestive enzymes responsible for converting starches into glucose. This delay changes the speed at which sugar enters the bloodstream, transforming a rapid surge into a controlled, manageable rise. The body responds very differently to sugar that arrives gradually versus sugar that arrives all at once. What makes this process especially compelling is that it works with the body's natural design rather than against it. Instead of forcing blood sugar down artificially, apple cider vinegar allows the digestive system to pace itself. This slower glucose release reduces the demand for large insulin surges, which are often the root cause of energy crashes and metabolic strain. When insulin is released in smaller, steadier amounts, cells become more responsive to it. This responsiveness is essential because insulin resistance does not begin overnight. It develops when cells are repeatedly exposed to excessive insulin signals. By easing the pressure on this system, apple cider vinegar helps preserve insulin sensitivity over time. There is also a critical neurological component to this process that often goes unnoticed. Rapid blood sugar spikes activate reward pathways in the brain, reinforce cravings and encouraging repeated consumption of quick energy foods. When sugar absorption is slowed, these neurological signals are softened. The brain perceives energy availability as stable rather than urgent. This shift alone can change eating behavior without conscious restriction. People often notice they feel satisfied longer after meals, not because they ate less, but because their blood sugar is no longer swinging between extremes. Another important layer involves how apple cider vinegar influences the digestive environment itself. Acetic acid alters the pH of the stomach and small intestine in a way that affects carbohydrate digestion. This environment discourages rapid enzymatic action while supporting more efficient nutrient absorption overall. The result is not delayed digestion in a harmful sense, but optimized digestion, where glucose delivery aligns more closely with the body's energy demands. This balance reduces the likelihood that excess sugar will be diverted toward fat storage. What's particularly fascinating is that this effect can be observed even with modest amounts of apple cider vinegar, especially when consumed before carbohydrate-rich meals. The timing matters because it prepares the digestive system in advance, essentially setting metabolic expectations. When the body anticipates a slower release of glucose, it responds with more measured hormonal signaling. This anticipation is part of the body's adaptive intelligence, and apple cider vinegar acts as a cue that encourages this adaptive response. Over time, repeated exposure to this pattern trains the metabolism to handle carbohydrates more efficiently. Rather than creating cycles of excess and depletion, the body begins to favor stability. Energy levels become more consistent. Mental clarity improves, and the physiological stress associated with sugar overload is reduced. These changes are not dramatic in a single day, but they accumulate quietly, reshaping metabolic behavior in a sustainable way. Perhaps the most important insight is that apple cider vinegar reframes the relationship between sugar and the body. Sugar itself is not inherently harmful. It is the speed, quantity, and context in which it is consumed that determine its impact. By slowing sugar's entry into the bloodstream, apple cider vinegar restores a sense of metabolic order. The body is given time to respond appropriately. Cells are allowed to function as intended, and energy is distributed rather than stored prematurely. This is not about control through force, but about guidance through understanding. When digestion slows, regulation improves, and when regulation improves, the entire metabolic system begins to work in harmony again. Apple cider vinegar plays a significant role in enhancing insulin sensitivity, particularly in muscle tissue, which is one of the body's largest and most important glucose-using systems. After a meal, insulin acts as a messenger, instructing cells to open their channels and allow glucose to enter for energy. When muscles respond efficiently to this signal, blood sugar levels remain stable and energy is readily available. The challenge arises when muscles become less responsive to insulin, forcing the pancreas to release higher amounts just to achieve the same effect. Apple cider vinegar helps interrupt this cycle by improving how muscle cells respond to insulin at the molecular level. The key driver behind this effect is acetic acid, the active compound in apple cider vinegar. Acetic acid influences enzymes involved in glucose transport within muscle cells. When these enzymes are activated, glucose transporters move more effectively to the cell surface, allowing sugar to be absorbed from the bloodstream with less insulin required. This means the same amount of glucose can be cleared using a smaller hormonal signal. For the body, this represents efficiency, and efficiency is the foundation of metabolic health. Muscle tissue is uniquely positioned in glucose regulation because it can store glucose as glycogen and use it immediately for movement, posture, and basic metabolic activity. When insulin sensitivity is high, muscles act like powerful sponges, pulling sugar out of circulation and converting it into usable energy. Apple cider vinegar strengthens this sponge-like behavior. Instead of sugar lingering in the bloodstream or being redirected toward fat storage, it is channeled into muscle, where it serves a functional purpose. This redirection changes the metabolic outcome of a meal without altering the meal itself. Another critical element is how improved insulin sensitivity reduces metabolic stress. High insulin levels are not neutral. They signal the body to store energy and suppress fat breakdown. When apple cider vinegar helps muscles respond to insulin more effectively, insulin levels remain lower and more controlled. This environment supports metabolic flexibility, allowing the body to switch between glucose and fat as fuel more smoothly. Over time, this flexibility is associated with improved energy levels, better endurance, and reduced fatigue after meals. There is also an important connection between insulin sensitivity and inflammation. Poor glucose uptake by muscles leads to elevated blood sugar, which increases oxidative stress and inflammatory signaling. Acetic acid has been shown to influence pathways that reduce low-grade inflammation, creating conditions where insulin signaling can function properly. When inflammation is reduced, insulin receptors on muscle cells regain their sensitivity, reinforcing a positive cycle. Improved glucose uptake leads to less inflammation, and less inflammation further improves glucose uptake. Timing and consistency amplify this effect. When apple cider vinegar is consumed before meals, muscles are primed to receive glucose efficiently as it enters the bloodstream. This preparation allows glucose to be directed toward immediate use rather than storage. Over repeated exposures, muscle cells adapt to this pattern, becoming more metabolically responsive. This adaptation is not forced. It emerges from repeated, gentle signaling that encourages the body to operate as it was designed to. What makes this mechanism particularly compelling is that it does not rely on extreme dietary restriction or intense exercise to be effective. While movement certainly enhances glucose uptake, apple cider vinegar supports insulin sensitivity even in sedentary conditions. This is especially meaningful for individuals who struggle with energy fluctuations or who are in early stages of insulin resistance. By improving how muscles respond to insulin, apple cider vinegar provides metabolic support that complements lifestyle changes rather than replacing them. The broader implication is a shift in how the body allocates energy. When muscles efficiently absorb glucose, the body prioritizes function over storage. Energy becomes something the body uses, not something it guards excessively. This shift alters post-meal experiences, reducing heaviness and mental fog, while supporting sustained physical and cognitive performance. Through its effect on muscle insulin sensitivity, apple cider vinegar subtly guides the body toward a more balanced and resilient metabolic state, where sugar serves its intended role as fuel rather than becoming a source of metabolic burden. The liver sits at the center of blood sugar regulation, acting as both a storage unit and a release valve for glucose depending on the body's needs. During the day, when food is consumed, the liver absorbs excess glucose and converts it into glycogen. At night, when eating stops, it carefully releases glucose back into the bloodstream to keep energy levels stable. When this system works efficiently, blood sugar remains balanced even during long fasting periods. Apple cider vinegar supports this process by improving how the liver responds to insulin, allowing it to store and release glucose with greater precision. Insulin resistance in the liver is a critical but often overlooked factor in blood sugar imbalance. When the liver becomes less sensitive to insulin, it continues releasing glucose even when blood sugar is already elevated. This inappropriate release contributes to high fasting blood sugar levels and places constant strain on the pancreas. Acetic acid, the active compound in apple cider vinegar, enhances hepatic insulin sensitivity, helping the liver recognize when to hold glucose and when to release it. This improved signaling restores order to a system that often becomes chaotic under metabolic stress. One of the most striking effects of apple cider vinegar on liver function appears during the overnight period. While the body sleeps, hormonal patterns shift, and the liver takes on the primary responsibility of maintaining blood glucose. Studies have observed that individuals who consume apple cider vinegar in the evening experience more stable fasting glucose levels in the morning. This suggests that the liver is storing glucose more effectively as glycogen and releasing it more gradually throughout the night. The body wakes up with steadier energy, rather than entering the day already in a state of metabolic imbalance. The mechanism behind this effect extends beyond glucose storage alone. Apple cider vinegar influences enzymes involved in glycogen synthesis, encouraging the liver to prioritize storage when glucose is abundant. At the same time, it reduces unnecessary glucose production through a process known as gluconeogenesis. When gluconeogenesis runs excessively, the liver produces sugar even when it is not needed, pushing blood sugar levels higher. By moderating this process, apple cider vinegar helps prevent the liver from becoming an unintentional source of excess glucose. There is also a close relationship between liver function and fat metabolism that cannot be ignored. When insulin sensitivity improves in the liver, fat oxidation increases and fat accumulation decreases. Poor liver insulin sensitivity often leads to fat buildup within liver cells, impairing glucose regulation further. Acetic acid has been shown to activate pathways that support fat breakdown and reduce lipid accumulation in the liver. This dual action improves both glucose handling and overall liver health, reinforce the liver's role as a metabolic regulator rather than a metabolic liability. Another layer of this interaction involves inflammation. Chronic low-grade inflammation in the liver disrupts insulin signaling and interferes with glucose control. Apple cider vinegar's anti-inflammatory properties help calm this internal environment, allowing insulin receptors to function more effectively. When inflammation subsides, the liver becomes more responsive to hormonal cues, and glucose regulation becomes smoother and more predictable. This creates a metabolic rhythm that supports stability rather than volatility. The timing of apple cider vinegar intake plays a meaningful role in this process. Consuming it in the evening appears to send a signal that prepares the liver for its overnight responsibilities. This preparation influences how glycogen is stored after the last meal of the day and how glucose is released during fasting hours. Over time, repeated exposure to this pattern trains the liver to operate with greater efficiency. The result is not just improved morning blood sugar readings, but a deeper recalibration of metabolic control. What makes this effect particularly powerful is its subtlety. The liver responds not to force, but to signals. Apple cider vinegar provides a gentle cue that aligns the liver's behavior with the body's actual energy needs. Instead of producing sugar unnecessarily or storing it inefficiently, the liver learns to manage glucose with restraint and accuracy. This refined control reduces metabolic strain, supports sustained energy, and helps restore balance to one of the body's most essential regulatory systems. Stabilizing blood sugar has a profound effect on cravings and long-term metabolic health because the human body is wired to seek balance, not excess. Cravings are often misunderstood as emotional weakness, but in reality, they are biochemical signals driven by fluctuating glucose levels. When blood sugar rises rapidly after a meal, and then falls just as quickly, the brain interprets this drop as an energy emergency. It responds by demanding quick fuel, usually in the form of sugary or refined foods. Apple cider vinegar interrupts this cycle by smoothing out the rise and fall of blood glucose, changing the signals the brain receives and altering behavior at a biological level. When blood sugar remains stable, the hormones that regulate appetite begin to work more effectively. Insulin, ghrelin, and leptin operate in a delicate balance that determines hunger, fullness, and satisfaction. Sharp glucose spikes followed by crashes disrupt this balance, increasing hunger even when the body has consumed sufficient calories. By moderating glucose absorption, apple cider vinegar reduces the intensity of these spikes, allowing satiety signals to emerge naturally. People often find themselves feeling satisfied sooner and staying full longer, not because they are consciously restricting food, but because their internal chemistry is no longer sending urgent distress signals. There is also a direct connection between blood sugar stability and stress hormones. Fluctuating glucose levels stimulate the release of cortisol, a hormone that raises blood sugar further and promotes fat storage, particularly around the abdomen. Elevated cortisol also increases cravings for quick energy foods, creating a feedback loop that reinforces metabolic dysfunction. Apple cider vinegar helps dampen these fluctuations, reducing cortisol activation and allowing the body to remain in a calmer, more regulated state. This shift supports not only metabolic health, but also mental clarity and emotional steadiness. Over time, repeated blood sugar instability contributes to insulin resistance, low-grade inflammation, and metabolic fatigue. Each spike and crash places stress on blood vessels, nerves, and tissues, gradually impairing their ability to respond to insulin. By stabilizing glucose levels, apple cider vinegar helps reduce this ongoing strain. Lower insulin demand means cells remain responsive, inflammation is reduced, and the metabolic system retains its flexibility. This flexibility is essential for long-term health, allowing the body to adapt to different energy needs without becoming locked into storage mode. Cravings also have a strong neurological component. The brain relies heavily on glucose, and rapid changes in availability affect neurotransmitter activity. Sudden drops in blood sugar can lead to irritability, poor focus, and impulsive eating decisions. When glucose delivery is steady, the brain experiences consistent fuel availability, supporting better decision-making and emotional regulation. Apple cider vinegar indirectly supports this neurological stability by ensuring that glucose reaches the brain in a controlled, sustained manner rather than in erratic bursts. The cumulative impact of these effects becomes more apparent with consistency. As blood sugar remains stable day after day, the body recalibrates its expectations. Hunger cues become clearer and more reliable. Energy levels feel more even throughout the day. The constant background noise of cravings begins to quiet. This is not suppression, it is restoration. The body is returning to a state where appetite reflects true need rather than metabolic confusion. Long-term metabolic health depends on reducing the burden placed on regulatory systems. Chronic blood sugar swings accelerate aging processes, damage vascular function, and increase the risk of metabolic disorders. By supporting glucose stability, apple cider vinegar contributes to a metabolic environment that favors repair, resilience, and efficiency. In this environment, fat storage becomes less aggressive, energy utilization improves, and inflammation subsides. What makes this approach particularly effective is its simplicity. Apple cider vinegar does not override the body's systems, it supports them. It nudges metabolism toward balance rather than forcing control through extreme measures. When blood sugar is stable, cravings lose their power, appetite aligns with physiological needs, and long-term metabolic health becomes a natural outcome rather than a constant struggle. The body responds best when it feels safe, supported, and understood, and stability is one of the strongest signals of safety the metabolism can receive. So, the next time you think about sugar, don't think in terms of fear or restriction. Think in terms of control, timing, and metabolic intelligence. Small choices can create big biological shifts, and sometimes the most powerful changes come from the simplest habits, practiced with intention. Your body is capable of far more than you've been led to believe. When you understand how it works and gently guide it, you don't just manage sugar, you reclaim your energy, your focus, and your health.